Their phone calls back and forth where they just be like, your name, blah, 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 and he'd be slamming the phone down.
It was
There's
like
something about Germans shouting that is just scary or funny. Because this week it's The Longest Day from 1962.
authentically presents the D-Day landings from the point of view of both sides.
Especially coming from the West, but I'd imagine it's the same everywhere else. It does feel like sometimes, to one extent or another, geopolitics and relationships between countries and history and perspectives on views that are held by certain groups or how war is carried out or the idea of war, everything's always living in the shadow of World War II. It did really shape the modern world in almost every possible significant way. And it's such an interesting thing where I would wish I could step out of my own conditioned, indoctrined mind of being born and raised in London and having that sense of what World War II means when someone brings it up, when I see a film of it, when I see a documentary footage of it, if it's a book, if someone's telling me a story, the overall feeling that's kind of behind it and tied up in it is very distinct. I'll never be able to wipe that condition away, probably the same way I'll never lose my accent even if I moved somewhere else and lived there forever. It's so built in, and I wish I could step out and actually feel what it's like from a French perspective, where you were occupied the whole time, and the French resistance, and but of a lot of dumb jokes about it, you know, French losing the war so quick and whatever, and then eventually being liberated. The views of Italy, where you were the bad guys, but you also just kind of fucked things up and tied to the fascist governments and philosophies that were big there, I think well into past the 50s and 60s. Being an American, where you're brought in through Pearl Harbor, and then you're also having an entire war playing out, being fought largely just by themselves in Japan, and the nature of it, and, you know, completely different experience and connotations. And then the Germans, like, if you're a German, what the like, that must be odd. Like, even, it sounds dumb, but just watching the film, I was like, they can never enjoy a World War II film in the same way that we enjoy them. Even when they're humanized, which they are in this film really well, they're the bad guys. Like, they are always the absolute monstrous villains. Like, that is just odd. Like, even down to that sort of superficial, dumb level that doesn't really matter. The entertainment. How many great films are World War II films? They can't watch it the same way we do. But you talk about perspectives, and that's one of the things this film gets so right and was pretty revolutionary at the time. Hollywood, it was odd to have the actual languages of place being used. You know, when they made Genghis Khan, they were like, oh, let's throw John Wayne in it, that'll work, fuck it, who cares, just give him a tash in the hat. Whereas as this film opened, I was expecting to really enjoy it, but I was kind of shocked how modern and authentic it felt. You know, mostly before the 50s, especially the 60s, was stagey, theatrical. It was a different kind of acting. It was acting like they were on the theatre stage and overdoing it for the people in the back rows. Whereas this felt like a modern film with authenticity. And the opening 20 minutes, I don't think, featured a single English-speaking line of dialogue, because you were seeing the French resistance and occupied France and Germans and planning and procedures and stuff. And then eventually we get into the Brits. It didn't just cast genuine French and genuine German actors to play them and let them speak in their actual language. It actually employed 3 directors who each took charge of directing different national segments. You know, it was an American for the American sequences, a Brit for the British sequences, a German for the German sequences. And it was all held together and kept in line with the same tone and feel and vibe, the overall vision of one producer. Darryl F. Zanuck was really respected, kind of seen as a genuine mogul. He had served in World War II, and it was his ambition to make the most realistic, genuine depiction of war ever put to film. Ken Anakin helmed the British segments, Andrew Martin did the American segments, and Bernard Vicky directed the German segments. But it was Zanuck that held it all together, had the real vision behind it, would often be on set working with directors, making sure they're sticking to his vision, making sure they're keeping it in tone with what the other directors were doing. He would often take over filming certain sequences if he didn't think they were going right, or showing up to set with pages and pages of notes of things that needed to be changed. He was in charge of casting, had final say on the editing, was in the editing room and did most of the editing himself as he really put together his vision. Cut out sequences that he didn't think fit the tone, cut out any moments that he felt was too nationalistic, cut out any moments that he felt were too cartoonish, was intent on humanizing the German side of it. He didn't want cartoon characters. He didn't want evil villains, stroking their mustache and sniggering behind a corner. He wanted real living human beings making errors in judgment, some getting it right, almost kind of the heroes of the German side, like the one spectacled guy who isn't being listened to but basically gets everything right, predicts where the D-Day landings are going to take place rather than the expected route. He was completely in charge of the script. He storyboarded everything to within an inch of its life, which makes a lot of sense when you watch the incredible battle scenes and certain moments in this film. And he did that so that he knew the directors couldn't stray too far from what his vision was. But also, it's amazing because it works out so well in the battle scenes because you have these incredible choreographed long shots and enormous crane shots. There was a couple of crane shots where I honestly thought it was a helicopter shot until it started to go down and maneuver through buildings. And I realised, it must be fucking a giant crane on a giant track. For the actual Omaha and beach landing sequences and the battles that followed it as they moved further past the beachheads, the American director had done second unit work on Cleopatra and Ben-Hur filming the giant fight sequences, so he was perfect for those kind of moments. The German director was more known for thoughtful dramas. Although we see obviously a lot of Germans fighting, the main characters of the Germans are more the high brass behind the scenes and the politics and interactions, and who is it? Rommel's always buying his wife's shoes and fucking about and going to birthday parties while the other Germans are sitting there being like, oh, I think they've invaded, but I don't want to wake Hitler up, I don't want to get in trouble. So it made sense that he was the director chosen.
I've been in a position of leadership, but this is the story of the producers, the directors, the writers, the stars, the cameramen, and the technicians that I have been associated with. Without their ideas, genius, talent, and loyalty, I could not possibly be here tonight.
He nearly treated the directors like casting, and it was all to fit his vision. It's probably kind of similar, although it was only one director, to how George Lucas ran Empire Strikes Back. He took a back seat because he was like, you know what? I kind of suck as a writer. I'm a boring director. I kind of just play it by the rules. Actors hate me. Why don't I just find the best people, have a pitch, a general idea. I can say no and yes throughout the whole time, total creative vision, but I let really talented people, including even directors, handle all of that. And it wasn't that uncommon back in the day. Ben-Hur had multiple directors. Gone with the Wind had multiple directors. It actually wasn't uncommon for these giant epics to have entire sequences handled by different people because they could bring a different idea to it. But Zanuck was completely committed to making this as authentic as possible. And it's so unusual, some of the choices having it in black and white, which was unusual for an epic film of this day, having multiple languages being spoken like we already spoke about. But one thing that he could do to appease the investors and the studio heads and pumping all the money into this film, this isn't an art house film. It feels still an old film. It has moments where it's quite hacky, quite stagey. Who is it? Robert Beecham? No, something Beecham. He later starred in Twin Peaks, but he plays a young kind of everyday representation for the normal troops. He's scared. He doesn't ever even really get into a gunfight or fire his gun. He ends up sitting and having a really thoughtful conversation with a British character who's dying once they've landed in France, and they're just chatting about the pointless, horrible, bizarre nature of war and what it means and all that. So he has some great moments in the film, but he honestly was an atrocious actor. I was appalled by him. He was dog shit. But everyone else is a star. People criticize John Wayne because he was just John Wayne, but fuck it, man. When he was like, let's send them to hell, I was ready to fucking storm Omaha Beach.
Send them to hell.
The cast got criticism apparently for sometimes being a bit kind of like what Marvel movies get called today, where it's like you're looking forward to the next cameo rather than the next scene or line of dialogue. But because we're not from the time, we probably don't really notice some of the lesser ones that would have been recognized back in the day, so we can just enjoy it for Robert Mitchum, John Wayne, Henry Fonda. Henry Fonda, I think, has about 7 minutes screen time, even though he plays Eisenhower. Like, the cast is fucking stellar. That's what a great producer is. Arguably, Peter Jackson's like that. Like, not a lot of people realize that they had about 5 second unit directors, and they were dealing with a lot more key scenes that second unit directors would never get close to. But Peter Jackson directed a lot of it, but he had his overall creative vision. He would be there to check, like, you're doing it like this, I want it like this. He would assemble it together in the editing room and get to his vision. But, he's probably a pretty good analog for what this guy would have been like, and a lot of producers were like back in the day. It was less about the director, more about the overall vision, and it was tied up more with the studio heads and the political side of it and the corporate side of it.
The reason I picked The Longest Day is Cornelius Ryan, who is the Irish writer. The Longest Day is based on a bunch of interviews he'd done with people that done the D-Day landings, first-hand accounts. He wrote numerous books about World War II, but this is probably his most famous one. I really liked the way that this showed the sheer magnitude of Operation Overlord, code name for D-Day. Just the minute details. I like the fact that they're inside the briefing, so you had all the top brass from all sides. So like Churchill was in there, Montgomery was in there, who looked bang on. Them speaking to the people that were forecasting the weather. We can't do it now. All this stuff had to be perfect, Declan. I think D-Day, the opening of Saving Private Ryan, but that doesn't really tell the full story about all the planning and the logistics that went into it. And I think this is the best film that I've ever seen that does that. It shows everything. Even the camps that they were in before, bored out of their mind. I don't want to eat this shit food again. Like, I just want to go. Like, they were stuck in these camps for weeks, months. No other film has explained that like this did. That gambling, real. They all done that to pass the time. It really was brilliant.
I mean, you're not going to be worried about losing all your money. You're not going to play conservative if you've got a good hand or even a bad hand, when any day now you're going to be shipped off and you're going to get the order. You probably hope it never comes, but then it does come. And the conversations they must have had when they were just waiting around for days beforehand in between, and I'm assuming they had some refreshed training and general discipline, but I'd imagine there was a lot of general lying around time just waiting for that order to come. And the feeling of mortality, and just, it must have been horrendous.
They were stuck in these containment camps, waiting for the order, as you said, ready to go. And within these camps, the priests were more or less seen as rock stars. So like the priests would be going around these camps conducting masses. The soldiers were saying like, I weren't a religious person before, but I thought, fuck it, like, let me go to these masses and like hedge my bets, because if I do die, like maybe like God will have seen that I did make an effort in these last few hours of my life. One of the most cool exhibits I saw within the Pegasus Museum was from an American paratrooper who had gone into this French village and liberated the French people. And this American paratrooper had liberated a house, and the French lady was so grateful, but obviously she couldn't communicate that to him, so she thought, let me give him this rosary bead. And he kept that rosary bead with him for the rest of the war, and he remained alive. And then after that, he donated the rosary bead that this French villager had given him and his uniform to the museum, which was standing in the same...
I thought that story was going to get sexy for a second.
No, unfortunately
still a good
not.
one, still turned out good.
In the early dawn of D-Day, June 6, 1944, the largest battle armada in history heads across 80 miles of rough channel water from England to the northern coast of France. Barrage balloons and a massive concentration of air and surface guns protect the 4,000 warships, transports, barges, craft of every kind in the invasion convoy. Here is the major striking force of the greatest military undertaking the world has yet known. Here, after years of building, equipping, training, after months of minute, intense tactical planning, here is the decisive thrust at Hitler's Europe.
The coordination. It's like if you stuck Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers and about 5 other films together and compressed it into 3 hours and told it concisely. Apparently it got criticism for sometimes feeling too much like a documentary and too educational. Don't get me wrong, probably half the build-up scenes are expositional dialogue, just letting the audience know context and things, overhearing a lot of meetings happening and conversations. You mentioned Eisenhower. What do you think of his performance, by the way?
I didn't mind it personally.
I thought he was fine. I don't really know what Eisenhower was like, but interestingly, he was actually an art director from MGM. Wasn't even working on the film, never acted before or since, but just bore an uncanny resemblance to Eisenhower. And to the point where they were like, he's only got about 5 lines. Like, well, we cut even that down if necessary, but fuck him, chuck him in, he'll be brilliant. And Montgomery there as well. And you really do get a sense of everything that went down. You know, the gliders landing, the paratroopers going in, the various beach landings, the various different departments and divisions and their different jobs they had to do, even to the French resistance, and seeing them getting coded secret messages over radio broadcasts and listening in and suddenly knowing, you know, it wasn't like nowadays where you text your mate like, hey, I'm going to be 5 minutes late for the pub. Okay, blah, blah, blah. I'll meet you outside. The French resistance, who were kicking everything off, had to just assume, okay, that's the code.
Time to go.
I'm assuming no one's made a mistake. We know that's the code. It's go damn. We need to do that. Then the paratroopers and gliders that would arrive after the French resistance have done what they need to do. They just have to trust that that has happened as the paratroopers and stuff land. The guys landing on the beaches just need to assume that not only the paratroopers thing went ahead, but it worked and they claimed the bridges and the villages and the various objectives they had. What is such a sprawling, insane event, and which it should be because it's the biggest military invasion of all time by a fucking mile. The fact that this film really does, whilst being entertaining and still feeling like a fictional story, you know, not a fictional story, but still feeling like a film, you know, something that is ultimately entertainment first, it really does give you a sense of everything going on the battle.
It's a 3-hour runtime. It's a long film, but not once in any of the build-up scenes was I getting impatient, like tapping my foot going, hurry up, when's the D-Day landing going to happen? Like, I want to see them storm the beaches. I mean, maybe it's because I've just visited Normandy. That's a factor in it. But I was very, very happy and pleased that the lead up to it was exactly what I read about in Normandy. It was exactly what I read about in my Stephen E. Ambrose D-Day book. It got it bang on. It would have wound me up a lot if the actual landing and footfall were wrong. I would have been sitting there like going to you, Declan, this is wrong, this is incorrect.
I mean,
like,
not even in a bad way towards Americans, because fuck it, why not? But it's a Hollywood World War II film. Just naturally, I was expecting it to be 99% American perspective. But, you know, they gave the German perspective because that's the complete enemy perspective. But they gave so much, probably more screen time to the British exploits. It's an hour thereabouts of preamble of the building up and the days before and will they land, is the weather too bad, before we actually get the first landings with the gliders and the French resistance and the paratroopers and the commandos. And then it's probably another hour before we see those Higgins boats rolling up to the beaches. And it's funny because that is possibly the most single iconic image in war history visually, of that very distinct shape of boat rolling up to beaches with those giant X things and the landmines and everything dotted about on the beach and the German bunkers. If you see a random Spitfire flying in the sky in documentary footage, that could be from anything. If you see that image, you are thinking of D-Day, that specific day and that specific war instantly. Saving Private Ryan especially is kind of synonymous with D-Day, the D-Day landings, and now kind of in your mind synonymous with that's what the D-Day landings were about. But it's such a small cog in this overall picture of the overall strategy of the battle and how, and the invasion and how it was won. And it was wonderful seeing all these other stories that I didn't know about, like the poor parachuter, I think it was the 9th Regiment, who landed right in a German town amongst soldiers, just getting picked off by flies, most of them being shot before they even landed.
And, you know, they're all spread out and like lost, and they had to make like makeshift battalions. So like you'll be running along and they had these clickers, as you see in the film. So it's dark, you don't know who's a German, you don't know who's friendly, who's foe. And the system would be to do a click. If you hear 2 clicks back, that's a friendly, do not shoot him. And this poor American paratrooper, his parachute hit the church and he was stuck up there. And obviously the Germans saw him, they shot him in the foot. And for hours, Declan, he just played dead. So when you go to St. Mary-en-Glees, the church is still there. You can go in the church. It's really beautiful. There's really beautiful churches in Normandy, by the way. But on top of the church, they've put like a model of the man with his parachute still stuck there, hanging down. And it's just so cool. He got captured after a few hours. Like, obviously, the Americans were spread out everywhere. So they hoisted him up. He got sent to a German prisoner of war camp. And he escaped that camp and rejoined his original unit. Badass motherfucker.
I wonder if he was a religious man, because, I mean, I assume the days before D-Day, you're doing some fucking soul searching. You're thinking a lot about mortality and death and are you going to make it? All around just kind of shit in it, nerves, excitement, wanting the order that is going ahead to never come, but also being like, hurry up, just do it. The time and waiting around is killing me. And he's religious, so that would be all stirred up in it. And the weird irony or symbolism you would feel to have your parachute stuck on a steeple, surrounded by Germans with a big spotlight on you, starting to shoot machine gun fire and think, this is how I'm going to die. This is where I'm going to die. Is this symbolic in a good way, or is God forsaken me? Like, what? How am I going out like this? It's the iconic visuals of the D-Day landings is kind of really wrapped up in Saving Private Ryan, especially for our generation. But this film, it was just incredible seeing all these other sides of it.
There's a very famous American author, Stephen E. Ambrose, who wrote Band of Brothers, and he also done a D-Day landing, the battle for the Normandy beaches, the paratroopers paratrooping into Sainte Marie Anglaise before obviously everyone sees Saving Private Ryan, and you know the main beach is Omaha because that's the start of Saving Private Ryan, you know. But there was actually 5 landing beaches, and there was I think 2 or 3 British ones, Gold, Juno and Sword, because you got to remember that you're in the middle of like rural Normandy, France. You have to drive to each location, so each beach, it's quite a distance between some of the beaches, so it would be like a 30-40 minute drive. And bearing in mind I was with my 2 nieces, they're young kids. Obviously the tourism is a big part of their industry there, so each place that you went to, I think there's about 20 different museums, because you've got different cemeteries, you've got an airborne museum that's in Sainte Marie Anglaise, because that's where the American paratroopers paratrooped in to kind of like control Sainte Marie Anglaise, to take it over before the main infantry landed on the beaches. They had to cut out all the German infantry. That, you know that saying, hindsight's a beautiful thing, Declan. They realised that they got a lot of things wrong. What the British paratroopers had was a little lever called a quick release that they'd pull and the whole parachute would just fall off. The Americans never had that, so they're landing in these trees, they can't get it off and they can't get their knife, so they're essentially stuck, like a stuck target, just getting mowed down. There was an unfortunate story of a building on fire. One of the tracers had hit a barn and set it alight, and he essentially was floating towards the raging fire and he couldn't, and he just burned himself alive. Like, it's a lot of them, Declan, were landing in the surrounding water and canals, drowning. It's just fucking really sad.
It's got to be insane. You think if you're the guy whose job it is designing that stuff, the weird pressure, because you think, like most products, if you design something, firstly, all right, your business might fail, you might get fired, you might whatever, but the ramifications aren't really anything in comparison with you're at home, you're not a soldier, you're not going over fighting on the front line, your job is to stay back here and design the weapons they're going to use. And when you say that, you think of the aircraft carriers and the Spitfire and the German Tiger tank and all those things, but you got to think it was all down to the level of these sort of details, like how do you get your parachute off, which arguably might be even more important if that's a key thing to the overall battle strategy. So the pressure of having to get that right, and if you're the guy that you find out afterwards you fucked up, you designed the gun that always jammed when it was muddy, cost how many soldiers' lives and prolonged how many battles, and you designed a parachute that wasn't very practical, didn't copy the smart design that one of your allies used that you must have been privy to, and therefore cost loads of your countrymen's lives. It's crazy. And how do you really test it? I mean, I guess, look, the parachute thing, that's an obvious detail. Like, you should get that. Obviously, that makes more sense to do it that way. But certain things, it's like you don't know till it goes out there. And maybe you designed a great one. Maybe it's going to be heralded as the best in the war. Or maybe it's just going to be one of the things that held everyone back.
Yeah, I think Declan, there was massive egos on both sides of the Americans and British. So maybe the British and the Americans had a conversation and was like, why don't you have like a release? And they were like, no, but ours is better. Do you know what I mean? When it probably,
yeah,
when it wasn't.
Or it's a case of, you know, because these things, as much as it's the military and during wartime, it essentially is more powerful, I'd imagine, to an extent, in instant decision making and stuff like that, especially when it comes to ordering armaments. But it comes from private companies. That's the ones.
Yeah.
They might essentially not be private because so much of their stuff is classified, and it's not a free open market where they can be like, oh, we're just going to go sell to the Italians as well. It's very much held, but it is private operating companies who are needing to make money. And if you settle on your designs and put in an order of 4 million parachutes, please, here's the design spec. We've taken over 100 factories that were making jeans 5 minutes ago, but now they got to make parachutes. Go do it. And halfway through they realize, oh, we fucked up. There's a better design. There's a flaw in it. The first ones that are coming out aren't very good, or they're not working. Can you really do that during the middle of a war? And also like the economic side of it. And also, as much as people will be patriotic, you know, there's still going to be war profiteers and people taking bribes and just pushing things through because it helps a friend who runs this company and you put them in place. And, you know, there's so many weird little political, economic sides of it, bureaucratic sides of it that end up having, in some cases, fatal consequences for the guys that actually get thrown on the front line.
A good modern day comparison of your point there, Declan, would be the COVID pandemic. The Tory government had given the subcontracting to make the personal protective equipment, masks, etc. It turns out the Tory government had given a lot of those private firm contracts to their friends. You know?
I'm not in on the ins and outs of it, especially the UK wise, but like crises just always get exploited. Money. Even if it's not overly malicious, but there's like, even if it's casual nepotism, when the consequences are this grave, like it's kind of like now where the military and some Western governments put in very new radical political ideologies ahead of the main objective that, you know, pretty much anything in the military, whenever the decision-making process on anything small or large happens, basically it should be, does it make the boat go a little faster? Does it make it a slightly better war machine? Nowadays, people are going mad and jumping up and down and getting annoyed and going on Twitter and getting angry about some of these modern kind of wokey, whatever you want to call them, things that are affecting military decisions. But I'm sure that's always been the case in one form or another, whether it's more political behind the scenes or just incompetence or just bias or whatever from people in positions of power. You got to think it's always happened. It comes up in every other part of history about anything. Why would it not come up during World War II as well?
So I just came back from a really humbling trip, Declan, to Normandy, where I visited the D-Day landings, beaches. Obviously, as you know, for the past couple of years, I would say, since I've left school, I've really got into my World War II history. I did do history. You did history as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I loved history.
But you wasn't in was you in Miss Gregory's class?
Yeah, I was.
Oh, you was in my class?
Yeah, we weren't friends then.
You must have been adjacent tables to me, or at the back. I was
in the back, I think.
You was at the naughty section. But I can't actually remember learning about D-Day. I know we covered the Blitz class, because I remember our good friend Zia, he had drawn like a block of flats. For some reason, the people hanging out of the windows in his drawing were throwing shoes at a British Spitfire, and I had to explain to him that they are British and throwing shoes at a Spitfire would make no sense. When I was in school, I was never really too interested in history. I guess it's because they kind of force the curriculum upon you.
It's a very weird thin slice of history. We did, I think, India, the Cultural Revolution, civil rights, and there wasn't a lot of World War II history as well. We did a lot of Soviet Union post-World War II as well. The Cultural Revolution, that was actually really interesting. But my girlfriend, Sophie, when she was in school, she must have just had a cool history teacher. One of those guys who did very old school, should have been fired, but he was just got away with it because he was a character and a good teacher. Out of two of their topics they had to focus on, one was the JFK assassination, which is fucking sick to learn about in school. And the other was, I think, the history around Area 51.
Why didn't we learn that?
Mate, how fun does that sound?
We need to go to Scotland to revisit our education. But since I've become sober, there's a lot of stuff that I've got more interested in. And World War II is one of them. I've read on the Nuremberg trials, which is like an 800-page book, all about, you know, trialing the Nazi war criminals from the concentration camp.
Does it go into Operation Paperclip, all the ones that got away with it that really should have been put on trial?
Basically, It's from the diaries of a member of the American prosecution who was at Nuremberg. But you know, when you read these kind of books, when I got to the end of the 800 pages, I was kind of like, I'm so relieved that it's over, because it was such a tough read and it was sad at the same time. And it's interesting because there was a map on a wall of all the cemeteries of Normandy. There must be like 10 or 11 where each cemetery was located and the number that are buried there. So you have Omaha Beach is there, and then built above Omaha Beach is the American cemetery. Everyone's seen Saving Private Ryan. You know, the first scene where he goes by the grave and it zooms into his eyes and then suddenly it's the D-Day landing. And I said to my dad, I wonder how many is buried here. It must be at least 10,000. I actually did Google it. There's 9,387 American soldiers just buried in that cemetery.
Just from Omaha Beach.
Just from Omaha and like surrounding battles. There's something called the Graves or Cemetery Commission. So they're like set up charities that are given money by the American government, for example, to keep it pristine. The grass and the graves is so beautifully kept. Bearing in mind, there's nearly 10,000 graves there, Declan. Like if you go to New Southgate crematorium, some of them are like miskept or mismanaged because they simply don't have the staff to go around to each grave. But there's people going around and lawnmowers, people going around like cutting bits. It's just really fascinating. And the American cemetery is all roped off, so you can walk down the paths adjacent to the graves, but you can't step on the grass to look at them. You can see their names if you had like zoomed in with your phone or whatever. But it was interesting to see the comparison between going to the Commonwealth graves, which are like the British, loads of people from New Zealand, there was Canadian, there was Australians. It's so different in attitude. It's a lot more, in my opinion, personable. You can walk up and look at the person, and on each grave it would have their regiment inscribed into it, and then below it would have a quote, I assume, that was given by their family of what they wanted to write. And my dad's friend John Meadows, who came along, he took us to a grave which was miles out from the main one, and his uncle, who he never met, was buried there. And it was quite a touching story that he had taken his own mother to see her brother's grave twice or three times. He promised her he'd take her one more time, but sadly she had passed away before he had the chance to take her for the third or fourth time. And we was all kind of like crowded round his uncle's grave, and you know, he kind of said like, well, I'd done it, mum, like I fulfilled my promise to go and see the grave. It was quite touching, really. I'm getting a bit emotional now talking about it. And connected to that grave, there's kind of like a building where you can go to, and there's like a lockbox, and you open the lockbox and there's people signing it. I came here to visit my relative such and such grave, like infantry, whatever unit. He had signed, John Meadows came here on my mother's wishes to visit my uncle again. And then it was quite touching because my little nieces, Annabelle and Rosie, they don't understand what's going on, but they just saw him writing and was like, can we also write a name? So he wrote his name, and then underneath tried to scribble Rosie and Annabelle. like it was just really touching. And it was kind of like a sombering experience because we're bringing around my little nieces who are like 4 and 6 and whatever. And then I noticed that Jane's dad was explaining to them like these people fought in a big war against an evil person. Like he's trying to explain to them the reason behind everything. What I really liked about it as well, that they filmed it on location. The paratroopers were doing combat within Sainte Marie Anglaise. Like I had just been there, and it's like, obviously this film was many years ago, but it's so cool to be like, I was just there and they're running around there, like and the soldiers were running around there, and like the Pegasus Bridge, the British landing was there as well. And I just found it very touching and a good homage to the people that were there and fought for our freedom.
Some of the performances are brilliant. Like we were saying before it started, how some of the English voices you always like, they annoy me from this period. Because, naturally, like back in the day especially, it would have been posh people becoming actors. But there's two kinds of posh voice. There's the mousy, I don't know about that.
I hate that.
Be there in a jiffy sort of voice. And then there's the grumpy, modern Hugh Grant. Say what you will about him, but he's got that grumpy, funny, likable posh voice. And Richard Burton's another one. Like, he sounds brilliant. He always sounds a bit moany. He always sounds like he's mid-rolling his eyes, but he has this wonderful delivery. And probably my favourite scene in this whole film. Beautiful scene. That young actor who I thought was shit, but he was pretty good in this scene. He's always like, I hear shooting, but by the time I get there, it's all gone. I'm missing the whole battle. I don't know what I'm doing. I haven't shot my gun once. And he sits down with Richard Burton's wounded RAF pilot who's dying, and they're just, on the surface, very plain speak, straightforward kind of chat, but you can see underneath it is this beautiful philosophical musings on death and the war they're in and the circumstances and the madness of it. And it's a beautiful moment between two of them. And I do love this film because, I stopped watching Masters of the Air, the sort of Air Force equivalent of Band of Brothers is what it was pitched as being, and their depiction of the British is it's just cartoonish. Even if they were bad or they were cunts in that particular company in real life, it was a cartoonish portrayal of them. It was just pissed me off. I stopped watching on the spot. But in this film, it really felt like we were all in it together. Like, even if there was, Eisenhower and Montgomery famously had a lot of clashes, and Montgomery was, could be a bit of a dick sometimes in the media, held press conferences after D-Day, really completely just not mentioning the Americans' involvement and saying he was responsible for saving the day. Could be a bit of a dick to work with, even from British quotes and anecdotes about him afterwards. But for the most part, it was beautiful. And this scene really hit home with it, of these two people on each other's side from different nations just having this beautiful moment as one of them dies and the other one's just feeling like a fucking bum. And they're both just kind of like, why are we here? It is for a good cause, but how did it end up like this?
Being a British person, it's really cool to see the British elements of it. And there was a museum for Pegasus Bridge where the British commandos dropped in and took the bridge before the infantry got there. There was a really cool cafe that is still standing there to this day, and it still is. When you go inside it, you can get a coffee and whatever, and it's got loads of paraphernalia and memorabilia like American infantry helmets and stuff. It was the first ever building liberated by the Allies, which were the British, in France.
There he goes. He's at it again. Did you ever hear such a bleeding racket in all your life?
Yeah, it takes an Irishman to play the pipes.
As I said, Pegasus Bridge was the bridge that the British paratroopers landed on, and their brief was to secure this bridge at all costs because it's an important point for, getting trucks through and tanks and whatever. So they had to take that. They took the Germans by surprise, and these gliders, they were very hard to control.
They're essentially like giant paper airplanes where they'd be let off by actual conventional propeller airplanes and just set to glide. You picture gliders, you've seen videos of them and them taking off from cliffs and stuff, but these things were huge. I think you said there was one that was made just to transport troops, which is still going to be really heavy. Like, it's obviously made of light material, but you can tell it's solid looking, it's big. And the fact that it could glide for so long and pretty accurately steer for the most part to safe landing spots or good landing spots strategically, but then also the bigger ones that carried trucks and tanks and stuff. Yeah. And it's just insane. It would just never occur to you that it'd even be possible.
So one of the greatest airborne achievements or feats in World War II is Sainte Marie Anglaise. When they were landed in, because it was dark, a lot of these people flying the gliders had never seen any combat before. So obviously they're trying to land the gliders and there's machine gun fire and, tracer bullets showing where the aircrafts are. And they were so frightened of the tracers because they'd never seen combat that they were panicking and just crashing. The tracers, if it actually hit the gliders, wouldn't dent it because it's more of a reconnaissance to see the gliders coming in. They all missed their landing points. They were scattered everywhere. They'd lost their company. It was pitch black. The gliders were just crashing into hedgerows. They'd done loads of prep for this, hundreds of hours where they were like landing on beaches in Kent and stuff, trying to recreate it. And they had made the exact models of all of the beaches and the town of Sainte Marie Anglaise. But what they didn't factor in, Declan, the hedgerows. Like, I saw some of these hedgerows when I went to Normandy. They're about 6 feet high, and they didn't factor that in. So when they're landing, they can't fucking see the Germans, so they're like just running about. They didn't factor that in, and there was gliders smashed up and like they'd broken their legs, and they were landing, unfortunately, Declan, in trees and right in the middle of the Germans, and just essentially they were cannon fodder. They were just getting shot. And so Pegasus Bridge, the first bridge that the British took before the actual D-Day, the infantry landed on the beaches, is really cool because obviously it was a bridge, like cars and like horses or whatever did go over it, so they do need a bridge still there. But the significance of the original bridge, they had to like kind of section it off because it's a different entity now. So you go into the museum and there's like an inside exhibit, and then outside is like a totally different area, and a part of the original Pegasus Bridge is just standing there that you can walk from side to side.
And is it still over the river?
No, so they've removed it totally. So they've built a new bridge on the original site that cars are still going up and down, so life can go on. On the outside bit, there was a remodel of an actual glider. So you could go up the stairs, and it's kind of like roped off, but you could like one of those museum exhibits where you can like poke your head in and look, and you can see like all the seats, and they had like a man resembling like an infantry soldier just sat in there. And like, I can't believe that they was able to land these planes, and there was loads of fields surrounding the Pegasus Bridge. And this British glider pilot, considering how much when the Americans parachuted into Sainte Marie Anglaise had crashed them all around, there was a scale model of Pegasus Bridge like shrunk down. The field right next to it, about 100 yards away, bearing in mind that he was coming in pitch black, he had managed to perfectly land the glider bang on next to the bridge. So they literally just got out of the bridge, and it's statistically like impossible to do it.
Get those bodies down. What are you doing leaving them up there like that? Get them down! Don't want those boys left up there. Take a detail and cut those bodies down.
So you got John Wayne playing Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin Vandervoort, commander of the 82nd Airborne Division, leads the paratroops into landing behind enemy lines, breaks his leg instantly, and he's basically getting wheeled around on a cart for the rest of the film, which I found kind of funny because I don't know, I guess John Wayne, I don't really picture him running a lot. He had that 50s movie star physique where he was kind of just sort of a fat guy, but his scenes I loved. I actually think I preferred him before the D-Day landings, before the invasion had actually taken place. You know, no one really delivers a rousing speech. They're all quite short and sweet and probably pretty realistic. But there's something about him where he's just like, send them to hell.
Yeah,
where you're like, yes, John Wayne.
Yeah, that was worth it for his casting alone.
He's a badass, man. You can't deny what John Wayne.
You can't give the enemy a break. Send them to hell. That is all.
It was kind of cool to see, like, you know, like you see a Wes Anderson film and you're like, oh, there's Tilda Swinton, like the ensemble cast. Like,
I loved it. Like Sean Connery shows up with his big bushy eyebrows. He has some great scenes where he's just hanging out with this kind of like posh English guy and this more Cockney guy, and they're just running about Normandy trying to meet back up with the rest of their platoon and survive the day. What did you think of Henry Fonda playing Theodore Roosevelt?
From what I've read about Roosevelt's mannerisms and the way he acted, it was quite a good portrayal. So I think, again, that was a good casting. What was your opinion?
Yeah, I loved it. I have no idea really what... I can't really recall hearing footage of Roosevelt speaking and his mannerisms and stuff, but there's something in terms of like what he would represent in this story, which is a massive part significantly, but in the actual battle, obviously very minute, but the symbolic thing of him wanting to go in with the first wave, which he probably just got in the way, but it's a beautiful notion.
But the symbolism is there.
The symbolism is beautiful. And when you're trying to convey that kind of dude, then having someone like Henry Fonda, you know, Henry fucking Fonda, absolute G. Other than a couple of outliers, maybe even the only outlier, like Once Upon a Time in the West, my favourite film of all time, my favourite Henry Fonda performance of all time, but still in this film, you know, everything he'd done before, he was the perfect symbolism of absolute integrity and even keel and keeping a real head, and, you know, I thought he fucking nailed it.
On that Roosevelt thing of him wanting to go in the first wave, I think that's good management and a good commanding officer, because the best managers and the best leaders, you never want to ask someone below you to do something that you wouldn't do yourself. So I think the symbolism of that is unbelievable from his, and it was well portrayed by Fonda, to be honest.
Montgomery was massive on that as well. Like, I don't know if he went in with the first wave at all. Like, he was obviously more of a commander, but he really, really, really was obsessed with the idea of he needs to be seen by his troops. Like, he would do infinitely more in-person meetings and tours of the front lines and the different regiments, and he didn't want it to be like symbolic shows of faith. He really wanted to talk to him, make him feel like, no, this isn't some guy giving orders with a name and a vague notion of him from far away. This is someone you've talked to, he listened to you. He was very big on making sure his guys got rations, making sure they got what they needed. He thought having ammunition deliveries was as important as having hot food deliveries and ensuring the kitchen was up to date and the food was nutritious and making sure people got actual rest. It didn't matter if they were low on staff or whatever and resources. He would find a way to make it happen, and he would speak to the people. He always wanted to know the exact psychological frame of every single division and every single part of his army, because he wanted them to feel like if they believed what they were doing, they understood the plan, and they actually had good feelings around the guy giving the orders, it would make a big difference in the battles.
Which all contributes to the overall morale of the army. Eisenhower was very much the same. He spent a lot of time going around the camps before the troops deployed, and he said, put your hand up if you're from whatever place he was from, and he started speaking to the people from, I'm going to say Ohio, it could be wrong, but started speaking to all the people from Ohio because I'm from there as well. A story on morale as well, Declan, like, do you know, I was talking about John Meadows there, whose uncle was there. We asked him, did any of your mum's other siblings go to the war as well? Because back then you were always from big families. She had another sibling who was the unit boxing champion. So basically he never got sent, because from their point of view, if they send the best boxer of the unit, who the troops have watched in numerous fights as the best boxer, the best fighter, and he gets killed, they're going to be like, oh shit, they've just killed the best fighter that we have. Yeah, so that was so fucking cool. Like,
it's funny talking about Eisenhower as well, where he went on to become president. I don't know much about the history of that period where he was president. I'm sure there's controversies like there is with any elite national leader, but he must have been a fucking competent, safe pair of hands. You know, like he handled World War II all right, so he must have been pretty good. But also, you think he was the guy that did the famous military-industrial complex warning speech as his final speech leaving office. So he was probably not just a legendary general and field marshal, but also a great president, like a genuine good man and good character.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
I did ask Jane's mum Joan about that, because obviously I knew he had become president after organising D-Day, but I didn't know too much, and her take on it was that he didn't really want to go into politics. He was more pushed. They were like, look, everyone idolises you for what you're basically a hero to this country, and you're the man we need right now. We're recovering from the war, so we need you to be in post. And just thought that it's pretty cool. Like, he served his country during the war and outside of it. Like, he must be seen as an American legend.
God.
God.
Should be on Mount Rushmore.
Yeah.
Then we got Robert Mitchum, who leads the assault on Omaha Beach. Absolute legend. I love Robert Mitchum. He's one of those guys where it's just a fucking charisma, you know. Kind of reminds me of Richard Burton in some ways as like an American counterpart, but just wonderful. Or you could have him reading a phone book and I'd watch it for 5 hours. You know, the sequences that he's in, although, you know, a lot of time he's in the background because there's these beautiful wide panoramic shots of the battles taking place, but they're just incredible. You know, some of the sequences are fucking insane. Like when they first jumped off the beach, because you're used to Saving Private Ryan, you're thinking, where's the instant machine gun fire where they haven't even got out of the boat yet and they're getting gunned down? And I was a bit like, wow, this is pretty tame in comparison. But once it got into the big wide shots as they were storming across the initial beachhead and into the bunkers and blowing things up, and just throughout this film, the battle scenes were incredible. Again, really blew me away. It's not uncommon for films from this era to instantly cut to stock footage. And it's stock footage because firstly it's completely realistic, but it's also extremely grainy and just has a different color visual cue to the rest of the film that you've seen when the actors are just chatting in offices and stuff. But in this, it's all real, and it's these long extended incredible takes as they're storming the beaches or taking a bridge, or the paratroopers are taking a village and securing things, or the French resistance are smuggling people in and out and pulling out guns and assassinating Germans, and it's just incredible. And Robert Mitchum, mate, one of the most watchable actors ever.
So my sister-in-law's mum and dad came from America. Jane's dad, who I think you may have met.
I met him at the engagement drinks,
yeah. His dad actually landed on Utah Beach. Obviously his dad is no longer here, so to like go back to a place in Europe all the way from America to walk on that beach where all those years ago your dad was also walking on, that is no longer walking this astral plane, must have been like a very, very emotional experience for him. Like,
yeah, it's beyond being fascinated by the history of it like anyone would be, but you got that emotional connection with your dad. You would have maybe not heard stories because he didn't want to tell them, but you would have seen him before and after the war and known about it, and it's gonna hit completely different.
Yeah, and there's like a little calf on the site of the Utah Beach landings called Theodore Roosevelt Calf, and there you look all around the walls and there's signatures everywhere. You can speak to the owners of the calf, and if you say to them that I had a relative, you say like your father landed here, and they'll give you a pen and you literally write on the wall whatever unit there was landed here. And it was just so interesting to go and read all the different signatures, all different walks of life. And the door that went in and out of the kitchen, the cast of Band of Brothers had been to the restaurant and all signed their names on the door. And there was a statue of Major Richard Winters, or Major Dick Winters, played by Damien Lewis in Band of Brothers, and it was all about him, and it was just so cool.
So you got Paul Anka, who's one of the US Army Rangers, who have those awesome Batman-style grappling hooks that they fire into the cliff. And I was watching this thinking, you told me about it before, and I was like, wow, that's nuts. But it's a different thing seeing it visually recreated like this, where if you said, all right, climb that rope along this cliff without the gunfire from the Germans above, I'd be like, fuck that. That looks so dangerous. But seeing the Germans firing down on them as they're trying to do the high school gym rope climb up the thing about 100 feet or whatever it is, and the Germans are cutting the ropes when they're halfway or shooting them in the head, making them drop. I just couldn't believe it.
So you can go and visit Pointe du Hoc. The film does it justice, but when you see it in real life, Declan, the sheer size of the cliff faces, like, it's incredible, like how they managed to even connect the grappling hooks and scale them. Like, I'm so glad they did include that in the film because it was so cool.
It's amazing to think about if you went back in time to the period where those villages were occupied by German forces, and even to the point where they were liberated. Unimaginable horror and stress and panic and depression each day and hopelessness. And then you think, if you told them that 100 or 80 years later, the entire economy would largely rest on tourism about this and about the fact that this happened, how crazy is that as a thought? Your unimaginable living horror will become a entertainment in a way. Obviously, I know you're not going there with popcorn and you're going to be respectful. It's a fascination, but it is still pretty odd.
Bless my mum. She was asking my dad, like me and my dad, like loads of questions, like why did Hitler start the war and like all this. So we had to like brief her, and then we was like, you really should have done a bit of research before you went to Normandy.
Like, you don't want to be a dick who's like, oh, you have to be into the topic I'm into and stuff. But it's like, that's pretty like Hitler and World War II's. Like, it's nearly one of them things where it's like, how would you avoid hearing about it? I remember speaking to the girlfriend of someone I know. We were talking about World War II, and she genuinely asked, were the Germans on our side or were they the bad guys? I thought they were the good guys on our side and France were the bad guys. And it's like, accidentally you would know the basic gist of World War II.
But I felt for my mum because like I think we were on like our 6th or 7th museum in like 5 days. There'd be like little chairs like dotted about, and you'd see like the wives like just sitting on it. All the military nerd husbands would like be poring over every single,
stroking their mustaches.
And then like I went over and I was like, "Oh, you're right, mum," and she was like, "I just feel like I can't read anymore." And I totally get that. Like it was too much to take in. Do you want to talk about how fit that girl is?
Yeah, pretty much, because the French Resistance, I don't know who this actress was. She kind of reminded me of Claudia Cardinal, but got to be one of the best looking women I've ever seen. Her body is beautiful. She's one of those women where nearly everything's perfect. Like the hair is gorgeous, the face and the eyes. You know, she's incredibly slim but completely curvy at the same time. You know, her titties and the fucking arse and like just basically the honey trap distraction for all the German officers riding a sexy little bike by him and stopping to flirt while the French Resistance sneaks a bunch of guys hiding under bales of hay in.
It's kind of like a comedy sketch.
I know, it reminded me of Hello,
they
Hello.
just sneak behind.
I was walking by the door and I heard a shit.
Yeah.
But I just had to mention her, even though I've got nothing else to say, because my God, man. Every time she came on screen throughout the film, I would just shout something about her being unbelievably gorgeous. Like
mouth was out. You like.
I was drooling on all sorts, man. Unbelievable. You know, you see a couple of Germans, and unless they were the big wigs, I was getting sometimes a bit confused between them. But the ones I loved was Pips, who was in charge of a Luftwaffe division, and whoever he was taking orders from. Their phone calls back and forth, where they'd just be like, "You're 9, blah, 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 blah," and he'd be slamming the phone down.
It was
There's
like
something about Germans shouting that is just scary or funny.
It was like they was having like some weird like lovers tiff. They were like, "What do you mean I can do it with 2 planes?" And they were like hanging up forcefully. You know?
Usually you have these little moments where you're like, remember these guys? Here's a scene. We just got to remind you they exist because this is going to matter later. But it was like 2.5 hours in and they were still just having phone calls like, "I don't have enough planes, you idiot." I was just kind of like, what is the point of this scene? But I liked it every time I went to it because it was almost like a release valve of tension of someone just shouting and getting pissed off. It's kind of like, what's the character in Aliens we always talk about? Game over, man. Game over.
Oh, yeah.
What's that actor called again? I love him. Whatever he's called.
Yeah.
It's like there's so much tension, no one's acknowledging it, and it's almost like you can use it as a release valve, a bit of, not levity because it's not funny, but you can empathize with like, thank you, someone's losing their shit.
The one I always laugh at, you know, the black guy in Terminator 2, and he's got the bomb, and he's like, "I'm gonna blow it," and he just, it's kind of like that. Yeah, you kind of need that bit of release sometimes because it is a tense film. So you have Omaha beaches there. There's all like these brown stones of like the German burials. And me being here, I do also want to visit the Germans because Declan, if I was a German guy who had died and just the thought of, you know, maybe I didn't want to be there. Maybe I wasn't one of those people that had signed up to Hitler Youth. Maybe I was conscripted and you know, you never know, Declan, there could have been pacifists from that side and there probably was that didn't want to be there.
In life, like it's, you know, you hear about the conscription, you hear about the brainwashing, but also I'd imagine Hitler and the whole leadership and the war in general and the messaging that they were wanting to put out and the propaganda would have been pretty much drilled into everyone to an extent. But, you know, what if you're just a farmer who gets conscripted? Yep. You know, they get a couple of the newspapers a few days late from the cities, but he doesn't really care. He wants to know, like, what's going on with the war? Are we winning? What's happening? Because it's significant. But, you know, he's not politically bought into anything. He doesn't care. He's a simple man leading a simple life, and then you're thrown into that situation. I can't imagine the scenario. Everyone likes to think, "Oh, I wouldn't have kept slaves, I wouldn't have worked for the Nazis, I wouldn't have done this, I would have been brave." But, you know,
you wouldn't put in that situation.
It's not true. Like, we've seen it time and time again that you make the films about the amazing people that saw through it and risked their lives fighting against it in the resistances, and you don't make movies about the 99% of the people that didn't stand out or didn't see through it or didn't do it. But still, it is, you know, I would definitely get to see it myself, I think.
Auf meinen Knien? Zu ihm hinkriechen? Nein, kommt gar nicht in Frage.
What's interesting about John is he relocated to Germany many years ago, so he brought along his girlfriend, who I'd never met before, but we was talking, and she said to me, I find it hard. Imagine you're going around and all these years later, you're thinking like, how could a country that I was born in do these things? So like, Daggy would come to the museums because she wanted to educate herself, but sometimes she found it very difficult, and some days she said like, I can't face going to another museum to read about what they had done, like, so you guys go and I'll go around and, you know, just hang around the outside. And I felt for her really, and like we visited the German graves with her, and I think she had signed the German remembrance book, so you open them and people leave like little prayer cards, and I think her message was very touching. She wrote, it's so good that we can remember the German people who also lost their life in a respectful way, but we must take action to see that something like this never happens again, because everything that's going on now with, you know, Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, we can't have an event such as World War I or II again. There must be a level of diplomacy administered that hopefully these events can come to a peaceful conclusion, Declan.
It's them bells. I've had them in my ears for 10 hours. Ding dong, ding dong. Yeah, fine.
Once production was finished, Zanuck had the mammoth job of getting into the editing room and piecing it all together. And, you know, he cut a lot of stuff, he changed some scenes, they did some reshoots, but eventually assembled this one long 3-hour film, probably quite short by big epic standards even at the time, and it just blew audiences and critics away. This was kind of like what Platoon did for the war film as well, you know, eye into what it was really like between soldiers and really that sort of incredible authentic feel. You know, this is nowhere near as grounded as that. It still has hokey moments, stagey delivery, you know, it's very much of its time in that way, but so many things about it were so new and revolutionary and modern and respectful. These weren't cartoon, periphery, one-dimensional characters in the Nazis and the Germans. From top brass down, in every side of it, got their real, genuine, realistic depiction. And it's also an incredible film, entertaining film, filled with people that walk in and just have 3 lines that's basically just educational, so the audience knows, okay, now this is going to happen in D-Day, or this is significant, but it's Robert Mitchum saying it, or it's Henry Fonda, or it's Richard Burton. So you just know it's going to be said brilliantly. And sometimes, this isn't why this film is good, but probably like 50% of making a good film is pretty easy. Cast amazing, charismatic actors, have a good production values, and 90% of the work is done for you. It's entertaining just on the surface value, and you can use that surface value to sell the more experimental, revolutionary vision and ambitions for the film behind it that this film had. I like even the bad films from this era, so I thought I was going to like it, but I was blown away by just how good this film was.
Firstly, before I give my final thoughts on the film, I do want to say that for any American viewers or any British viewers or any other nationality, if you're into World War II, I really would recommend going to visit Normandy, the surrounding towns where these events from the longest day took place. You know, going around the cemeteries, and for me personally, from a family perspective, seeing my brother's wife's dad step on Utah Beach where his father had landed with my little nieces next to him, from me looking at it from a distance, I thought, you know, this is an incredible experience. And I'm still thinking about it even though I got home a couple of days back. You know, I find myself to be reflective and incredibly grateful for what I have. Like, you know, imagine you go around thinking life's a bit shit, and then you're seeing these 18-year-old, 19-year-olds who bravely went into this war to fight an evil dictator and lost their lives. Like, they never got a chance at life. Like, and I feel incredibly grateful, and it was a sobering experience. So I would really recommend going if you're interested in World War II and D-Day. It's a great experience. And on the film, from all the stuff I read in the museums and all the places I visited, you know, it really hit the nail on the head, historically accurate to everything I read in Normandy. And it was so good to like see the model of the man hanging down and seeing it in the film. And, you know, I was turning around to Declan saying, oh, this is the parachute guy that I was saying. This is point de blanc, like point de hook, sorry. You know, all those things. And I think the greatest praise I could probably have for the film, Declan, is me trying to explain to my mum on the ferry, this is what happened on D-Day. But I wish if we had 3 hours before that, I could sit down with her and watch The Longest Day, because I feel like this is probably the best film that I've ever seen. I mean, everyone's take on it would be to the forefront of their mind, Saving Private Ryan, which is the most realistic depiction of what D-Day would actually be like. But in terms of the actual whole Operation Overlord and the whole event, the lead up to it, including the landing and the battles, this is the one that I wish I sat down with my mother and said, look, let's watch The Longest Day for this 3 hours, and then you'll be prepared to go and have the context to visit these actual sites. So that's my greatest praise of it. To me, it's the greatest depiction of the whole of the grand scale of Operation Overlord and the D-Day landings that I have ever seen, condensed into 3 brilliant hours. So from me, thumbs up all the way for The Longest Day.
It's funny, isn't it? He's dead. I'm crippled. You're lost. I suppose it's always like that. I'm in war.